Gold participants from around the world. I'm Kristen Schwartz, licensed midwife and MC for Gold Learning. And I'm chatting today with Miriam Zoila Pérez about her upcoming presentation, Providing Radically Compassionate and Inclusive Care. Welcome, Miriam.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so thrilled to have you here with us today and chat with you about your upcoming presentation. So before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your professional journey?
Sure, yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting path. I became a doula when I was still in college. I got interested in midwifery and sort of alternative approaches to birth in the United States as a college student, and then thought I wanted to be a midwife. And so a midwife I knew was like, why don't you become a doula first to really see if this is what you want to do professionally? And so I became a doula and kind of never looked back toward midwifery. And my path as a doula has been primarily as a form of activism and volunteer work. I volunteered in a public hospital in North Carolina back when I got trained as a birth doula, and then also volunteered as a full spectrum doula supporting people having miscarriages and abortions in New York City in a hospital there. So I'm not a professional doula in the sense that I don't charge for my work, but it's been a huge part of my journey. And these days I focus more on writing about maternal health in the United States, particularly about race and maternal health and the intersections there. And have not actually been at a birth in many years, but it's definitely influenced my work in incredible ways.
What an interesting journey. And yes, coming to your topic now, speaking about the topic you're speaking about, providing a radically compassionate and inclusive care, without giving too much away about the presentation itself.
Yeah.
But first of all, how did you get interested in the topic? And can you tell us just a little bit about it?
I mean, I guess really a lot of it started with my own identity. You know, I started a blog called Radical Doula over 10 years ago now, almost 11 years ago, partially because I felt alienated as a queer person, as a genderqueer person, and as a Latina in the sort of birth activist world more broadly. Also, as someone who is pro-choice and really supports the full spectrum of healthcare options when it comes to pregnancy. And so I started that blog as a way to try to build community and to express my opinions on a lot of those issues that were related to who I am in the world. And so in that way, it's a very personal thing. But now these days, I think it's more about I just honestly just the necessity that when it,
Mm,
in the United States particularly, marginalized groups like women of color and LGBT folks suffer worse health outcomes because of that marginalization. And so I think it's on it's the responsibility of healthcare providers, particularly in the perinatal world, to really take those things into consideration in terms of the care that they provide.
absolutely. And in recent, I would say, years, there is quite a shift, and many healthcare providers really
Mm,
see the need for inclusive care and want
mhm.
to, make changes, and they are willing to learn. But what kind of barriers have you encountered in your work with regards to that
Right.
topic?
I mean, I think one of the main barriers is that the medical profession, in many ways, the healthcare profession, is built on this idea of the provider being the expert. And in these situations, when you're working with marginalized communities, you're often, if you're not a member of the community, you're often not the expert. So you don't actually know what's best, or you don't actually even necessarily understand the experiences of the people you're working with. For example, if you're a white provider working with, black communities, or if you're a straight provider working with queer communities, or if you're a cisgender provider working with trans communities. And so I think to really do this work well, you have to kind of put aside some of that sense of expertise and then instead be in partnership with the people that you're working with to learn about their experiences and to then provide the best care. So I think that's probably the biggest barrier, is just that our approach often doesn't leave room for that idea that the person themselves is an expert in their own
Mhm.
experience. And obviously, midwifery model definitely incorporates that more, but there's a lot of pressure from the other sort of parts of the system to be very, sort of like I know best. And I just don't think
Yeah.
that that works when it comes to marginalized populations.
That's a very, very good point that you just made there. Instead of,
Yeah.
being the expert, building
Yeah,
a partnership. I really like how
exactly.
you how you worded that there.
Yeah.
And now, now to our last question here. What is it that you would like our delegates to take away from this
Yeah.
presentation?
And I think there's two main things. One is really understanding that discrimination does impact people's health. And we'll talk more deeply about race as an example of that in the United States, although it applies to other forms of discrimination as well. But that discrimination actually has real material impacts on people's health, and particularly in the perinatal time. And then two is just some of that more about what approach can you incorporate into your work to really improve how you work with marginalized communities, particularly those who are impacted by discrimination and the ways in which it affects their health. So it's one is understanding the research, and two is really understanding what a different approach looks like, incorporating that understanding.
Well, thank you so much, Miriam, for chatting with me today. Thank you for being here, and I am very, very excited about the topic. We all have so much to learn in this area, so I can't wait for the presentation. The live day for this presentation is October 16th. The presentation is titled Providing Radically Compassionate and Inclusive Care by Miriam Zoila Perez. And for information when this presentation is being held in your time zone, please go to www.goldperinatal.com. Thank you all for listening, and thank you, Miriam.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.